Yuki joined Kengo Kuma in 2002. She became a partner and executive vice president of Kengo Kuma Associate in Paris in 2012. She has been playing a fundamental and essential role in leading multiple major projects abroad, and with, as I said, particular focus in public cultural projects and especially projects in Europe. I have just, for those that don't know her exactly the project I'm talking about, I've just chosen some images. She has been in charge of the Opposite House in Beijing in 2008, that you see here. Then afterwards, if this works, okay, the Exchange Market and Library in Sydney with this astonishing wooden spiral-shaped facade that also gives a really warm texture that evokes a sort of bird nest. I found it a really nice building. And then some more recent building that have also been not so published, that probably you don't know. Like this, this is the Truffert headquarter office in Vals, so the place that every architect knows for the Peter Zumthor building. And here is an office for, is an headquarters for a company working for, with quartzite stones. And as you can see in this very intriguing facade, the use of quartzite stone is reinterpreted in a different ways. And it reminds also of, at least to me, of Japanese architecture and Japanese pagoda in some way with this reinterpretation of quartzite. So there is always in these projects always a relation with local materials that are revisited, that I found very nice and very intriguing. Okay, no, it was this one. Another project on which Yuki was leading architect is the Odunpazari Modern Art Museum in Turkey. Here, again, another material, a timber design, but with these volumes that are reinterpreting the surrounding streetscape of Odunpazari and the history as a timber trading market. And finally, a project that on which she will talk a lot in this lecture this evening, that has been recently finished, is the museum, the Andersen Museum in Odense, Denmark, which combines in a very, like a sort of fairy tales landscape architecture and exhibition design. Is a project that is seeking to give a visitor really an experience to enter in the world of Andersen through a narrative sequence of scenographic places. And there are labyrinths and forests, underground spaces. She will explain to us this very nice building. And she's now also working on an ongoing project, like this building in Copenhagen, the Water Culture House, that is just next to the opera on the border of the sea in Copenhagen. So with the indoor pools framed with these brick pyramids. And another project in Italy on which she is working, which is this welcome terrace, or the biophilic office on the former Rusconi area in Milan, again with the use of timber structure and a lot of integration with nature and biophilic design, also working together with the landscape architect Stefano Mancuso. So as I was saying to her before in a short interview we have made this afternoon, in all your project there is this important presence of the philosophy of mixing nature and environment, that you have synthesized in your curriculum in a sentence. And after this sentence, I will give the floor to you. So she says that the fundamental in a design approach is biophilic design that appeals to our senses to generate the form of architecture in response to the surroundings. We have seen the surroundings in the Turkish buildings, in other buildings, how they are reinterpreted in your project. Culture, history, and the life between buildings through in-depth analysis and observation in micro and macro scales simultaneously. So, Yuki, thanks for coming, thanks for joining us, and you will have like more or less 1.5 hours to explain to us what is biophilic design for you, what is your approach in design, and then I think we will have a lot of questions. So I hope you will not be too tired to answer to all the questions we have. So thank you very much. So you already have the microphone. This I can.
Is this microphone working? Okay, great. Thank you very much for a very thorough introduction. I never had such a good introduction, so very happy and honored. And I have to remind myself that I've been speaking to room full of architects, so please be easy on the questions and remarks later, but I'll be happy to take you through the projects that I've been engaged in leading to. All right, so I think we need to switch the presentation. Okay, so I would like to share with you 3 projects. One is Hans Christian Andersen. Second one is the Terrazza Verdi Welcome Project, which we are working on together with my colleagues here from Studio Vision in Milan. And the third one is the ongoing project, Water Culture House, which is also under construction. First one is the Hans Christian Andersen Museum. This was completed last year, mid-last year, but since the garden takes up huge spaces and as equally important as the architecture space itself, I see it as the project that grows over time for the next decades to come. So with these slides, I would like to introduce 3 important pillars of our belief in philosophy. One being the biophilic architecture. It is really in the belief that the natural elements and settings, how we put ourselves and imagine ourselves to be, it's a source of inspirations and finds comforts in living together and in the architecture, as if you are in the middle of the forest or living next to the vegetation, plants, and so on. So biophilic architecture is to take in as much elements as possible to feel that you are in the nature. And second one is this life between buildings. As we have been quite lucky and fortunate to be able to engage ourselves into building a lot of public projects, but of course not just a public project, even if it's a small house. We need to be, as an architect, all mindful about what we are creating, not the space inside, but not just the space inside and sensation inside, but we automatically create a new spaces in between the buildings. So there is a life between the buildings that you would recreate or influence by implementing one project next to another. Even if it's in the middle of the field, that's what we are assigned to and to create in this kind of space within the space, so to speak. The last one is the macro design process. This is something particular, I would say, in our practice in Kengo Kuma Associates, is that we pay a particular attention to the details, how it's constructed, and how the materials are put together and texture of it. At the same time, we design the buildings from large urban scale viewpoints. So this simultaneous approach of thinking the details and materiality, at the same time how we see how the positions and what kind of a role that it plays in the urban view. We try our best to have this balance in between. So the process is not a singular path of thinking from large to small, but small to large simultaneously, inside out, outside view of a design approach is something quite fundamental in our approach. It's not working. Yeah. So in designing process for Hans Christian Andersen Museum, it was very particular because contents was very heavy, meaning that what the museum would aspire to build in the museum, it has a lot to do with the author himself, because Hans Christian Andersen is a national figure, and everyone knows that the story as we are growing up. As an also adult, you read a lot to your children, or you must be quite familiar with certain stories that Hans Christian Andersen was writing. And it's quite interesting as you experience in your childhood all these like sparkle moments in these fairy tale moments. How it takes from imaginations to fairy tale that tells us certain stories and strike your imagination. But if you read and come back as an adult reading some of the stories, you realize like a lot of duality into this story and harsh reality. That, for instance, The Little Mermaid, how one dedicates so much to a person that she fell in love with, but then at the end she just becomes a bubble. That it's not it's in a way it's a harsh reality in the world that we live in. That it's not all the efforts and dedication. It doesn't mean that you end up having like an equal deserved result. But there's always upside and downside of reality that we all suffer from. So many stories, however fairy tale like it might be read when you were a child, it has this like really a reflection in a society that he was living back then, and which translates pretty well in the modern society that we live now. So we focus on this aspect of duality, the coexistence of the opposite, and blur boundary in between like fantasy and reality, nature and architecture, and so on. How do we translate that into the form of architecture was one of the most interesting but difficult things for us, imposed ourselves as a challenge. So some of the focuses or themes that we diverted from this duality is non-hierarchical, non-centric formation of the architecture and journey in between two worlds. So it's really not simple linear paths, but it's really complex in view of reflecting this duality in between. So as you can see, the site is quite wide, but the building occupies a very small footprint. So we try to engage to the largest extent as much as possible this garden together with the architecture, but then the architecture form is minimized to the best we can, and extension of the green surface itself is what makes the blurry boundary between the architecture and the landscape of the garden. And what's interesting in here is that we, at the same time, as I was trying to point out, the simultaneous approach is to really come in to derive the design from two views. One is from inside, which is the context of the author himself, the Hans Christian Andersen, the world that he tried to create. But at the same time, we saw the importance of creating this urban scene and urban public area that contributes greatly to animate and qualify the urban living for the neighbors and for visitors to come. But it's not that we just created the gardens, but the integrations of how we derive the geometry is something particular. It's made out of a series of a circular shape that we trace with the form of hedges, which is the green that is shaped out of the natural organic greens. So this ambiguity between the built form of architecture and the semi-open structure that are shaped out of the true organic elements such as tree is something that we made these sensations of ambiguity and duality at the same time. So how we came about deriving the form is first we started compiling all the aspects of what what makes up the museum, which is large surface of the exhibition spaces. So by suppressing them all underground, we have managed to create as open space as possible above ground, and to minimize the architecture footprint that are limited to a facility that requires natural lights, such as foyer, cafe, children's studio, and so on. So only those particular programs that has the benefit of being outside were remaining with the minimum footprints of the above ground, while all the fairy tale exhibition spaces were buried underground, which translates very well as the duality of the theme that we try to derive, because underground is all about fairy tale. Above ground, it has like reality that we link to our own living in the urban settings. So this duality that are separating with the surface of the earth from an underground world to above ground world, we managed to make this dual sense alive in the experience, but through the journey. So how it transitions from this space of the reality above ground to underground, we have traced this long meandering ramp, tracing these circular walls all the way to below ground. So it's accessible. I mean, it's solved also in accessibility, which is really important for our time in architecture specifically, to make every space accessible for any conditions. So this is the site plan that we have drawn up to, mostly during the competition phase. You can see like how architecture and the landscape becomes one language. So there's like widespread carpet of greenery that are base, and roof is also with the green. But then the hedges traces the architecture around, as well as it composes the space, open space above ground, which in a way it traces the exhibition space below ground with some perforations that connects visually from one world to another. So another special opportunity that we were given is this stretch of the lines that became part of the museum garden experience, which is the lightweight, a tram that runs through this. It's a part of the new urban planning that this city of Odense was developing. So these tramways that cut through, it's part of the experience as the museum fairy tale, that you experience this gardens already running and riding with the tramways. So it's something very particular that we got a chance to work on. So different speed of the experience. One is this fast tramways, and then the second is this meandering bicycle. You know how Denmark is full of bicycles, and they have really, it's a prime means of getting around the city. So taking into considerations of the speed of a bike, but it slows down in a meandering way as you approach and go through the museum experience. And the rest are purely dedicated as open garden as for 24 hours, that people can naturally go wander, and also they can use it as lunch, picnic places, or to celebrate your outdoor sunny days and so on. So it's more dedicating for the everyday activities than the exclusive museum experience underground. And we have focused on thematized garden experience a lot. So one is like a very urban garden scale of the bicycles and tramways that has a taller hedges. So we have planted the taller trees that one can meander around. Just passing through, you're already in the Andersen's world. And this has been built. And this is in the springtime last year, where all those flowers and colorful moments happens. So as you can see, these two rails that you see on a white concrete ledge is the pathways for the trail, the tramways. So you can experience all this by just simply passing through. And bike lanes are also present. That's the tram. And the bike lanes are also present, mixed with the pedestrians. So you are already experiencing the part of the Andersen in the everyday life manner. And the one that you see behind the big trees are quite symbolic. It's dedicated for the children's facility, so children can come and do some creative activities together with the adults. but mainly for children. But it's symbolic because it's the trees that is also decorated as a focus of the certain holiday time for the community. So we made it strategically positions this together with the tree house like children's facility together with this light tree, and that's the entrance to the deeper side of the Andersen. Another thing that we noted is that we make this museum as multifaceted, so there's no single approach. It can be approached from all directions, from smaller street to the bigger urban street. So every approach that you take, you are drawn into these circular moments, into the garden within the museum. So here we call it as a pavilion garden. So starting with the children's tinderbox, we call it as the creative studio. There's a cafe also adjacent to this urban garden, which would also draw you into these pavilions that are dedicated for the entrance. So this is the middle one. I don't know if you can, oh yeah, here. This one is the entrance to start your exhibition journey. And this is the pavilions that are existing that are close proximity to bathhouse of the author himself. So it has this multiple access from everywhere that you can start the museum in a similar interest of being drawn into the museum gardens and then starting the experience from anywhere. So this is like the fine overview of how there's no hierarchy, but it's everywhere is the entrance. There's no front or there's no back. So everywhere that you come from, you'll be drawn into this Andersen's world with the hedges. So this was still growing. The hedges are still quite raw. So we are looking at next 10 years to fully grown and to the scale. But another amazing thing is that the museum agreed to have a gardener as part of the maintain the gardens. So every once in a while, you see a gardener actually working in the gardens, which becomes part of this tradition, very much of a part of the museum experience, wandering in the garden. And this is the sense of scale, that you have this quite lush seasonal gardens that becomes the foregrounds and backgrounds of all this pavilion experience. And this is the cafe that is adjacent to the urban scenes. And here is the children's studio. And there's a part of the garden dedicated a direct projection to the underground exhibition space below. So above ground, below ground, it almost has this duality, simultaneous experience, back-to-back experience that offers a diverse type. So here it's the fairy tale garden, which is literally tracing the walls and exhibition sequence below. And what we have made in particular is this next part. Is this secret garden that is like a sunken garden that connects from above ground to below ground. So some gardens are really contributing for an experience below ground. For instance, this one, it has this water surface that is visible from below, Little Mermaid space, as if this is simulating the experience of people who are looking into the ocean, and then Little Mermaid of looking up to the surfaces of water. And this, the sunken garden in the middle, it acts as the portal, something that connects from above ground reality to below ground fairy tale garden, which is built as such. But it's not that we have connected the direct visual communication from above ground to below ground, but it's a sense that you can have a glimpse of what might happen below in a silhouette. And from below to above, it's the same. You see the sense of this garden, but you don't have a direct visual connections from above to below ground. So this is an experience that one can have walking through these sacred gardens. So we hope that this will grow far more densely in the next few decades, that it becomes really a rich background of an experience below. And here is the ground floor plans. So these pavilions are independent. It could work independently entrance in and out, and being surrounded by a certain type of hedges. And this is the entrance that one can meander through this small street, and from the urban bigger streets, and it goes out and in to these entrance spaces in between these pavilions. And we made it in such that you enter through the introductory exhibitions, but one is going to slowly descending with this long ramp, and gradually it reaches you to the very bottom of the exhibition space below. So this is the entry, starting from the street, and takes you to these entrance spaces. So it's the in-between, it's the sensations that you are falling into the in-between space, and every space has this timber structure above ground, while underground it's mostly composed of the concrete structure. So this is the below ground. It has this large square meters of the surfaces for a tinder box, which is the children's studio. So it starts from the very low, dim space, and then it grows above ground, which is mostly consists of a creative studio for children. But we have imagined that there's a root below ground, and then it starts growing as a tree. So it's almost similar to the tree structure above. And this is the picture that I always like and I took during the construction site. As you can see, the bare structure and compositions of meandering paths going down. It's very obscure, and you gradually see the sense of bright outside to very dim, obscure underground space. And this is one of the exhibition space that you can sense in between the ramp. There's always this residual in between spaces that one can find. And this is, I think, I'm sure you can experience the same, understand what we are experiencing, that in any architecture, there's always like a discovery when it's built. There's a sense of unexpected spaces that mostly happens in between these planned design spaces that you would not expect as such. And this was some of it that was really amazing, that during the construction we start to discover these very intricate residual spaces in between the design. And we had the great opportunity to work with the curator. So he found these in-between spaces and start working with us during the process of designing constructions. Okay, let's hire or commission an artist. He's a Brazilian artist who is really working with this, something in between the nature and architecture. He was growing the trees out of the concrete foundation. So this tree-like an installation, which is made out of the wooden chips, that he sculptured it out of the concrete column. So it has this theme responding quite well to this ambiguity, duality of man-made versus the nature. So he recreated these bare trees in between this space, and that are quite working with the themes of tinderbox, which one soldier finds the tinderbox in the root of the trees. So it was more like in between the art installations with the simulations of the fairy tale scenes. And this is more the planned exhibition space. The exhibition space itself, it's designed by this British company called Event Communications. So we have designed a space together with them, but these installations are mostly done by them. And we have worked with them this very bottom fairy tale space. It's for the space along the meandering path. It was mostly about his biography, like the author's journeys through his life. So it was more and more monochromatic and very simpler palette. Once you reach to the very bottom of the fairy tale ground, it starts to get colorful. It starts to explode, and it has projections and colors and so on. That has a thematized spaces like Little Mermaids and so on. So it was really nice to work very closely with the exhibition designers as such. Architecture facade was also inspired, and this is something that we do often, and as our philosophy believes that we look into the context, the surrounding buildings, and try to find the connections. So we have looked into these traditional buildings as such, which is with the timber frame, and it's fitting with plasters and masonry and so on. So we try to reinterpret it in the modern way to have this framing structure to support the glazing, so that we can still work with the natural lights and openness for the ground floor, timber framed pavilions. So these are the simple illustrations of traditional framing structure, but we also wanted to project and reflect the natural branch of the trees, and this is the result. So as simple as such, but it works quite well in the language of continuations, because these are existing from back in the Middle Age, and one of it is the bathhouse of the author himself. So by keeping the frame but making it open, it has this continuity of the tiles, roof, but open structure that connects to the inside. And this is also this picture I like very much, that it achieved this blurred, the tree branches with the hedges that are shaped to create the space, but then this adds another layer to this, branches like the facade structure with the trees that are cut by man's hand, and that's in between the nature and the architecture and the actual trees that has this, speaks together as a dialogue in between. And so these are somewhat more strategic illustrations. So above ground is the pavilions made out of fully timber structure, but the core that connects from below to above, it's used for a means of vertical circulation, stairs, elevators, but also it acts as the core for binding structure among all this tree-like radiating timber frames. And this timber frame also, it's acts as a support of the facade. It's very simple, and this radiating, sweeping configurations of the timber frame, it binds and connects back to the concrete structure, which also hosts an elevator and staircases. And the outer frame is a support also for the glazing facade, so it has multiple purposes. And it would appear quite light here, but it's quite a chunky structure, which I think it worked out quite well in the scale of the whole project. So it's one of the cores that supports and connects back to this engineered timber. And the roof that holds the light sedum vegetation is composed of the CLT, the cross-laminated timber slabs. So it's entirely made out of timber, engineered timber. And this is how it relates. The studio spaces for children, it has this background view of the light trees, which I was showing in earlier slides. So all in all, it has like many layers of factors that we looked into, and urban to the traditional architecture, and also from inside his author's narratives himself. So that was the first project, and the second one is the Terrazza Verde, which is we are designing and is under construction. It's the multi-commercial complex, consists of office and the retails, which I'm designing together with these great colleagues of a studio patient, Giulia, Cecilia, and Massimo here. And it's been quite challenging, but we had the great pleasure working from the competition. It goes back to 2 years now, maybe. So it's a hard work every day, but we are quite proud of the outcome. So I have to mention that today I'm presenting closer design of the competition phase, because many things happen afterwards, and there's a lot of revisions and etc. So I would skip all that, but just to focus on how it departed as the competition scheme, just to convey the essence of the project for today's purpose. So to this one, we got very lucky with working with great competent teams of architects as well as the engineers. So we're working with Manis for the technical parts, the MEP mechanical parts, as well as the AKT, who is the structural engineer from England, as the concept, deriving of the concept. And now, during the executions, we are working with the Italian engineers, Monterio Studio, which is helping us to carry out for the execution. So how we approach this project is that We have received this vision from Europa Resources, which is the developer who held this competition and invited us through this project, which was quite unique because the ambition was that to become the new and the very different type of the office environment, which appeals to the creative, more innovative companies and people. But at the same time, the prerequisite was that to create the public realms, which is the piazza, together with this commercial complex, which is really nice because, of course, office, as expected, naturally, people are drawn to more practical, rational, modularized, repetitious planning, which is ultimately it's a tower or the courtyard configuration, which in this case, because of the expectations and vision that were that we interpreted from the Europa Resources vision, which is different, and there were these public programs implemented into this creations of the proposal. So we took 4 opportunities to play with it. So as you can see, it's not at all the typical repetitious, modularized, clean office typologies, but it's the opposite. It's a horizontal spread, that there's no repetitions of the flows. To some level, yes, but largely no. As you can see, perhaps the adjacent complex is more the typical typologies that you might imagine. Courtyard typologies that office might be revolving around with some tower configuration, which works, and which you can do a lot of creative things within. But what we have come up with more of the integral landscape elements that spreads like a finger that connects in one route. And that the reason why we chose this is to keep the project very low. So it's a human scale, relatively, compared to the rest of the urban, very high towers that are quite visible in the city of Milan right now. But it's the opposite typology, so it creates a diverse spaces, but also in view of, by having these finger-like configurations, to have the space in between dedicated for piazza, but also for each individual office spaces to have a natural, a lightful spaces in between. And also by having the taller buildings adjacent to another taller buildings, but gradually fanning out to become very low to respond to the expansive greenery of the Parco Rambla, which is quite beautiful, as natural as it can be, close to the urban settings. So in a way that we have cascading down, and with having the greenery around, it creates this language of horizontality, but also from an urban scale to gradually come into the residential human scale. So it achieves these both purposes in multiple ways. And as you can see, if you create like this really huge open space, quite separated from interior spaces, one starts to lose this integral spaces and sense of scale. So we have tried to achieve this sense of scale that are kind of close to your eyes and to human scale, that you can enjoy by adjacent to it or also by being in it. So that's the strategy that we had come up with. So the project is situated in a quite interesting corner and quite close to the metro station, that one can easily access to this outskirt location from central to Milan. And we took full advantage of this active potential urban crossing. So we kept the focus on this aspect of these active zones, and to create this public closeness, open piazza, but also to navigate our ways to connections to the park that are quite lush and quite deep in greenery. And also to create private, meaning that the access to the offices close to the adjacent office building, so one could have an easy, more exclusive access to the office functioning. And these finger-like configurations of the architecture, it makes it possible to insert these screens that leads you to the entrance to commercial offices, as well as to imagine the continuity of the deeper side of the park beyond. And here we can imagine the separate accesses. It gets more private towards the closer end to the adjacent office complex, and it gets more open and engaged for commercial and public entities. So the building starts low and open to the piazza as well as on the street, and then it gets taller towards the deeper end. But we have these finger configurations to really animate and cross, making the crossing point of the office, which is private, but also these integrations of the public spaces, so that it's not pure separations per functions, but there's a moment of integral animated atmosphere that we were striving to achieve by having this crossing and dynamics to it. So this is more or less the result of how the complex would be made out of. And this is when you are approaching from the park on the lower side, looking into the building. So you can see the twisting moments, how the building gradually grows from low to the taller end. But this is also in dialogue architecturally in an urban manner to these tower configurations to the next building. So we are creating a sort of dialogue in between these entities. And it starts high and to go cascading down. As you can see, each office has this opportunity to be outside. So we have these large roof gardens that the office can enjoy as a background, but also it can go out. And this means a lot, especially in this time of pandemic, that the office cannot be like a really enclosed, confined spaces, but one needs to breathe and to go out and to go back in. So it serves for both purposes, to have this greenery that are responding to and to contribute to the neighbors and community, but also for people who works inside to have full opportunities of breathing and out and to be outside. And as you can see, that's the sensations of being on the top of the roof. So the clients, the Europa Resource, they came up with quite innovative ideas of having like a greenhouse. So one can grow edible plants like tomatoes and basils, and these could also contribute to the canteens or cafeteria below. So it has this circular aspect of growing and consuming and enjoying within. And those vegetations are also in view of creating the synergy to the natural settings of the park. So there will be some, plants that can share or in the same species as the park. So there's also a spread of the green surfaces that one can oversee in continuity of inside of the space and the extension and spread out, and to become these continuous grounds and foregrounds together with the park beyond. And this is you're in the ground floor piazza looking up, and I think we have achieved in some ways to connect to this human scale and the urban scale by having the lower ground connecting to the piazza. But it also has this intention of mixed plants that changes in seasons. So this lush garden that continues and to grow to the above terrace spaces. You can see the growing towards you, but then it's not up front that you'll be obstructed with the vertical glass buildings, but rather it has this, the connections to the human scale. And at the same time, in a crossing point, then it has this dynamics, the appeal to the transparency that one draws in, but also the activities are visible from inside out and outside in. So it's not just about disappearing, but it has this presence of dynamics and animated sense in a way that could promote the activities for our community, but also to draw people from the urban scenes of the central Milan, but to the outskirts of Milan, there's still a sense of dynamics, a sense of active spaces, and that could draw people in. And each space has this small courtyard that either is in complete outdoor spaces that leads you to the indoor gardens that can sense these greeneries and natural lights. And every spaces that we focus on is with this structure that made with the timber. So above grounds are purely composed of the primary steel frame and secondary timber frames, and that supports the CLT, the cross-laminated timber frames. So the below grounds consist of the concrete structure that holds the series of concrete cores that holds the stability for upper ground. And we have chosen to work with the steel frames to create this larger span to provide the maximum amount of flexibility for the above ground office layouts. That we have the CLT as the slab to support the flow loads and so on. It multiplies to each floor. And we have also utilized fully structural elements as the timber frames that support the CLT slabs that are exposed to every spaces. So it's not there's not much of a decorative elements. It's pure raw structure that functions and it works. And we chose to work as a pure, honest structural expressions, but it contributes a lot to the warm feelings that for each office work environments. And as you can see, there's abundance of lights, but at the same time, it has this simple open space that gives a large level of flexibility for an office layout as such. And entrances are open, which is you start entering to the spaces under this canopy. But as you can see, most of the the architecture presence focuses on these expressions of the eaves, which is a little bit mixed of Japanese expressions, that it's open structure timber frames that are visible from below. So when you look up, the dominant architecture expressions are this timber joist and the cantilevered eaves that supports the greenery on the edge of it. And not just the architecture, but we have approached from the very beginning using a certain instruments and assessment tools. So LEED is commonly used, and while now I guess it's also commonly used. But this is something new to us to design with, which is mostly focusing on the experience of our well-being, so the health and experience that has a direct the space experience. So we have worked quite closely with the specialist to assess our design from the very beginning. So this has also branching out extensively to give a focus on the reduced demands to begin with by looking into an efficient way of designing the facade or the exterior envelope, but also how to use the water as a source of energy and increase the efficiency by looking into mechanical systems. And the renewable alternative sources that we have looked into as part of the design derivative tools. And of course, materials, we have paid a keen interest and attention to use as much wood as possible to minimize the carbon footprints and least amount of concrete. But also, for instance, they demolished the buildings. We have used the crushed concrete to backfill and so on. So try to recycle as much possible as the found or recycled materials for underground spaces. And having fully spread this roof greenery, this also contributes to the environment, to the immediate, of course, the building itself, but for the outside building as well, reducing the heat island effect and so on. So that was our project together with the colleagues here. And the last one, maybe I make it brief. It's a water culture house that is also under construction now. It's this part of the larger development that focuses on the water. So, I mean, as much as the green that we used for previous two projects, this is all about the water and water experience. So there's a pool, wellness facility within the larger development. So this little corner is our projects. We have, again, read into the context, this area of Copenhagen, it has a lot of pitched roof configuration, so that was given. We worked in the configuration as such, but in a very elaborated interpretation. So it's one building, has like this jaw-like pyramids-like aggregation, but each one in response to the program inside. So it's the scale translations of it that makes this specific configuration as unique as it is. And we have used as materials of this a brick, which is quite typical and also quite specific in the Copenhagen or the Denmark. So we make this perforation aspect, but this negative, positive configuration, it has opportunity to play with an external body pool, which is water swimming experience in between this shallow roofscape. So there's a lot of integrations that happens on outside, inside, inside, outside again. So it's something in between. So this is a body pool that are exterior roof pools that connects one swim hole to another. And those of you who might have experienced in visiting onsen in Japan, it has this natural outdoor pool that you can enjoy being outside and still being inside a warm pool. So we wanted to bring that culture into this foreign land of Denmark. So there's a lot of playful aspect of warm pool that has this cascading, playful for children, an exterior that is set in between the roof. So this one has this narrow body pool experience that is connected by the staircase, which is also placed outside. So one can go through this staircase and swim your way through this warm onsen-like experience and overlooking the harbor of the Copenhagen harbor. And there's this ambiguous, the perforated brick roof-like envelope that casts the shadows and ingress of the lights, and it play with the water is something that is particular in this swim hole facility. So we have played with skylights and perforations, and that makes this unique experience of being in between. So we have also played with the cuts, the voids and shadows and lights that makes this another aspect of a biophilic architecture, which is the lights, water, and shadows, and so on. So, yeah, it's an urban, but it has this different aspect of playfulness and experience that are appealing to our senses, a sensorial aspect that makes also, as a part of the biophilic design approach, far more special in experience. So it's not just achieving the sustainable design in an honest manner, but we have played with a lot of intricacy of architecture design that is very tectonic, and at the same time is very tactile, like the materiality and the way of putting together the detail that affects in a larger sense urban to our micro-macro sensation. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Do someone of the public has some questions? I have the microphone here, and I can do like a balletta. Otherwise, you want. So thank you very much for this inspiring lecture. And I can start with the first question, so I break the ice. So the first question is on the first project that how, if you can say something more on how was also the dialogue with the landscape architect, I imagine that worked on, or you managed also the landscape design yourself in the office, or there was an outside landscape architect.
Yes.
This was the question.
Yes, the landscape architecture that we work with, there's a Danish landscape architect who understands the Nordic gardens and plants and so on. So we were working from the very beginning, mass planning. They are incredible, very talented, very professional landscape designer. They understand not only just the plants, but also an urban aspect of the projects. So, all this intricacy of, meandering paths of the bicycle lanes, the tramways, and how to go about in the pedestrians scale, how we integrate the various type of the plants was thought out very much together with the landscape designer. And what was also quite amazing is that this is the first time that we work with the actual living plants to make it into a space. So the hedge is something very typical that you see in the residence area in Denmark, that how you demarcate your properties with the hedges. And that is simple, planting trees and then you just cut them into the shape that becomes like a wall, but then it grows and it changes over the seasons, so it's like a soft boundary between your properties to the neighbors. And so we use this like a morphing aspect into the Hans Christian Andersen's world. So it was like a kind of funny play between the, architecture, man-made, organic. So there's this, perfect blur in between this. But then to actually implement this, you need a certain, knowledge of what type of plants that we choose and how long it would survive, how does it change over the season, what kind of maintenance and durations and frequency that is required. So there's a short-term design that in view of 50 years and 100 years in vision of how to maintain. So it was a very, very difficult design to achieve. But in the first year, when it was just planned, we were so nervous because the plants are so raw. And they were like, don't worry, it's going to grow. And then it did grow in one season. Summer, it started to flourish, and all these trees become so much alive, very much dense. So we're very happy that we had this concept. However challenging it was, I think it started to grow, and it becomes more and more alive as the time goes by. So yes, and to answer your question in a simple way,
I was
landscape designer, was an important part. Yeah.
That you change. I mean, you're not a team always with the same landscape architect. I mean, in that project, you worked with a local. Landscape art, which is also obviously part of the biophilic approach to understand the environment.
Yes, absolutely. Important to work with a creative, competent group of people. Yeah, for sure.
And my other question was in the role of architectural competitions in your projects. I mean, you mostly work on architectural competition, I suppose. I mean, at least the 3 projects you mentioned, they are all the result of architectural competitions. So this is how in the percentage of the work that you have in the office of Paris, how many are the result of international competitions? Mostly all of them, or there are also direct commissions?
That's sure. We have majority of projects are through the success of the competition because it has more, secure ways of achieving our vision, because it's not that we start with the, pleasing aspect of the clients, but rather we present our vision, and if they like it, we win. So there's a certain assurance that we can carry on our vision
without less compromise, I would say, along the way. So yes, we have been quite lucky and successful in series of competitions as such. Yeah.
There is a question over there, Fabio.
Valletto. Thank you very much for your lecture. I have a question about. I want to focus on the designing process. For you have illustrated some designs and projects in different parts of Europe, and you're working on different parts of Europe, and Kengo Kuma Associates works in all the world. And how do you mix up all the references you have? For you are Japanese.
Yes.
And I read and I have seen a lot of Japan in in your projects, in the project in Milan, and in the project in Denmark too. And the second question, or the first one, is how do you mix up all your references? And the second is about biophilic design, and how much is the Japan? How much Japan is biophilic? It's complex, but I hope that you have understood what I mean.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I hope I do. Well, maybe the first question about, because it's true though, we are Japanese, very much so. And we have these amazing opportunities to work abroad and to do many interesting projects in Europe. I think we have this approach of doing the research and investigations at the very beginning. We read a lot of books, and we go to the site and analyze the environments and the culture and understanding the vision of the clients. So for instance, Hans Christian Andersen, we did have a long conversations with what it means and observing the architecture grounds and to try to relate and implement, because we do believe that we need to make link with the surroundings. Otherwise, the projects that we implement becomes very much of a foreign object. But at the same time, we have to strive to achieve the newness in the many projects. They desire this. I mean, people would like to see something different, particularly to an experience like museums, or that has like ambition of building something new, but relates to the familiarity and newness balance in between is very, very intricate and very delicate. So we try to approach from both ends. But that said, I think as an architects, we all do the same thing. We observe and we research, we investigate, and try to derive out of the context and something that through our filters and through our interpretations. And then at the end, that becomes something very particular in that land. And it may not be that, I'm not Italian architect. I don't have the same understanding as you of creating something Italian. But then we can observe, as a professional architects, to extract the essence, to make links to. And as an observer, we might have this advantage of having the fresh eyes to look at what's historically done, and to really extract the essence and to try to relate to, but also to bring another layer to it. So I think to respond to a very specific vision, context in that particular area is what we do, regardless of where we choose to be. So that's one, but of course we need to have a very competent local collaborator always, who can translate and advise us better in the regulations and architecture culture, so that we have this assurance as a team that can propose something that is sensible to the certain context. And it was a funny thing that we have also dealt with like landscape committees for for this Terrazza Verde, which these guys here guide us through how to navigate our ways without confrontations, without conflicts, but to really appreciate the observations and try to understand the historic background, where they come from. And certain comments that came to me is like, why? But then they, help us a lot on understanding, like, because of this, they said this, because of that, they said that. Okay, then we need to respond to a very sensible way, in a delicate manner, as a foreigner, to respond in this manner. So there's a lot of sequence of the events, and it's not easy. It's very, very difficult to come as a Japanese, but that's how we are. And your second question about the biophilic, how it relates to architecture or culture in Japan. I think as a Japanese, we have worked, we are the culture of living with the nature because of the survival, but also this animism, the spirit that came from really a long, long history, that it is a spirit existing in every part of the nature. So, protect and live with was a large aspect back then. And building with the trees and to be as natural as possible to the outside was traditionally perceived as such. And there was a time that was very simple. You live like outside, building with trees and using wood, and that was naturally biophilic. And many of us are coming from backgrounds of farmers, and forestry, it occupies 60-70% of our land. So, and the earthquake and so on. So we live with the fears of the nature and phenomena of the nature. But nowadays it's not the same, there's this insulations and constructions, and there's many layers that we need to respect, like energies, and so it's not as simple as let's build something here with the wood, which started as like most biophilic as it can be, but now this, where is it produced? What kind of productions that factory is making, what type of energy that it uses, and so on. So it's like transportation. You cannot import from here, but you can import from here. And I have to say Japan is a little bit behind on that aspect. But I think, for instance, countries like Scandinavia, Denmark are way ahead of our time of already, targeting to a high level of an efficiency and losses. So in the modern construction, there's a different frame of work. In traditional Asian time, we were true to biophilic living, but nowadays I think we need to face a lot of different criteria in making the architecture, especially in a large building like this. In Terrace Verde, the Welcome Project, it has another level, or another range of challenges to make it biophilic. So, yeah, it means differently now, I think.
As I can understand also from the question of Laura, so today biophilic architecture is becoming a little bit too trendy.
Yeah.
I mean, you have it in your philosophy, in your DNA since many years, in the DNA of Kengo Kuma offices. But how today you can understand what is a fake biophilic architecture?
Yeah, that's why it meant to us so much that we also explained the tools that we have been using. So the structure, constructions, and the technical systems are all integral. And we have started analyzing this in approach to such. So however random it may appear, all these like eaves that are working efficiently in the depths to prevent any excessive sun that might come in and compromises the energy loss and so on. So it has like many layers of analysis that we started working with. And you're right that we no longer can just use wood and call it biophilic, or there's terrace, there's the ventilation. It's not enough anymore. It needs like really many layers of approach that makes it biophilic. Not just biophilic, but it's true to this nature, from a bone to the muscle to the skin. I think we really are in the era that is really complex to do one single building. Yeah, it's very, very challenging.
Are there any other questions from the public? Yes.
Thank you, Yuki, for your speech. I think that biophilic and landscape design is very difficult because you have to control nature. Which is, in your opinion, the best way to control your project? Maybe you have designed an olfactive way or a path with special perspectives, and with nature you don't have the exactly perception of the result. So you have a special contract with the general contractor where you put I don't know 2 years of control in the result, or have you ever been a design that you did that have been compromised because of the nature has grown differently than you imagined? Thank you.
Yeah, that's really a relevant focus, I think. Because, for instance, Hans Christian Andersen Museum was all about that. We need quite meticulous planning for the future maintenance. So there's like a monthly maintenance, yearly maintenance, and bi-yearly, and so on. So this was actually part of the proposal already during the competitions and the schematic and so on. So landscape designer was in view of sourcing, maintenance, and how many people it needs, how long, and so on. So there was like a long-term planning, including this maintenance cost. And we were so lucky because Denmark is kind of used to this aspect. So they can actually estimate this in a realistic way of how much, how long, what it takes to have this green building. But it is true, we were very nervous if this rendering image that we have presented would still be alive. It could be very sad looking gardens, which were very worrisome, but at the end it started to grow, so there's a large range of an unknown factor that we just need to take a chance and believe that all these specialists can do it a good job. And I think Denmark has this rigorous process of approach, so that's amazing. And in case of Terrazza Verde, we proposed this greenery everywhere, which we were very nervous because most of the commercial developers, they just don't appreciate it because it costs a lot. And for future tenant, how do you maintain this? Because you have to go around pruning the trees and watering them, and there's like a huge level of maintenance concerns for the future. But I think another factor that is really important is to work for a client who has this understanding and technicality, as well as the investments that requires over time. And using the timber exposed structure is also another. I think to consider a cost-efficient building, first off, using timber it's on contrary for the large scale, and second off, for the future maintenance, it would need a care, and one has to understand that aging is part of the beauty of the building. So I think you have to have a right approach, but also the receiving end, the clients, builders, needs to be in line with all this. So it's a choice that we make as an architect, who we want to work with and who we are working for to make our project possible. So it's all this combination. It's like a really refined marriage among all these people who might share the same interest and who might feel as responsible as for the future life of the building, I think.
As we are giving the lecture also on streaming, we have also some questions arriving from the computer. So I take there is a question asking, what would you suggest to a young architect approaching profession now? And I would ask you, before answering to this, also to tell us a little bit about you and how who you were before entering in Kengo Kuma Associates. How do you train, and why you choose Kengo Kuma Associates, and then answer to give a
it's like a life story.
Some tips to this young architect approaching profession today.
Yeah, that's a tough question. It's interesting because we had
talk about this during the lunchtime. Our colleagues here, that it's so difficult to be an architect and practice over years. And I see a room full of architects I'm speaking to, so I'm sure you know what I mean. But as a profession, it's extremely, hard. It needs a discipline, but as a practice to be, not even successful, but to survive, it's also a tough profession. So maybe, I don't want to discourage, but we talked about, okay, let's open a restaurant besides the architects. But anyways, for the younger generation, if you are into the study, it's an amazing profession. And I think our knowledge needs to be, over the years, especially now, it needs to be far more extensive. As I was mentioning, there's like many facets: sustainability, the social responsibility, the regulation. As the year goes by, it gets harder and harder. So, but at the same time, it's more rewarding because there's many aspects of the architecture that contributes back to society or our living. If you do it right, if you do it with the right people, for the right people, right purposes. So it's a rewarding profession that combines everything. Like it's a much of art, senses and experiences of nature. So it's an amazing profession. And I think now, as a student or people who might be wondering of the profession, it's nice not to, have a narrow view of just studying architecture, but I think it does help eventually to be, have a wide range of curiosity and an interest, travel and to, cultivate or work with gardens, and eventually, I think it will become part of the, nourishment of your visions and go back to why I studied architecture. It was more like a spontaneous thing, but I did enjoy many things like the photography and art and textile, creating all these things that adds up to, leading paths of the architecture, because architecture eventually it's combinations of many things. It's the material, it's the, shadows and lights and tectonics and structures. So it's an ultimate form of intricate, combination of many things, and that's what interests me the most. And now I trace back my childhood that I have raised and grown up in a countryside where my family was much about nature. So growing vegetables, raising chickens, and going to the nature, searching for food. That was part of my everyday living. However, that I didn't enjoy back then so much, but now I look back, I appreciate that sentiment and also sensibility that find the in the nature. So, and that has also why that I choose to work at the Tokyo office in Kengo Kuma Associates, because it has a lot to do with this sensation of like nostalgic traditions, but also nature and so on. So I think it circulates back also and branches out, exponentially. So it's a very nice profession to be. However difficult it might be, but it's an interesting one.
There is a lot of questions arriving. So, as Kengo Kuma, in the recent year, you were working also a lot in Italy. I don't know if the Milan project is the first project you are following in Italy, or you worked also on the Lodi one?
Yes.
Okay. And they are asking if in your dreams, where you would like to build a new project in Italy.
I don't want to offend anybody or supporting us.
Or obviously we are in Torino, so
Torino,
the answer is not. The answer
Torino,
is not
sure.
that in Torino. Okay.
Yeah.
We do not mention the two recent competition in Torino. Obviously,
No, you can mention
your dream, probably. Why not arriving first in one of the two international competitions that were just finished in Torino?
Yeah, that's true. No, there are many cities that we would very much like to, and I would very much like to. Every city that I visited, it has its own charm and amazing quality. But it's true, we recently lost 2 competitions in Torino, which is really unfortunate.
that I was really hoping to come back and do more. But it's not easy. I have to say, it's not very easy to expand our field of work here in Italy. And I learned it in a very challenging way, working on the project in Milan. And it has like a lot of bumpy road along the way and challenges. I'm very happy that we are coming to closer to realization, which is under construction now, so it's promising. There's no point of return, I hope, now that grounds are digged down. But I think working in Italy, there's many difficulties because of the context also. Not us being Italian, and there's many level of sensibility that we probably are missing to respond to. And it's not only that, there's many layers of decision-making process that are not necessarily have to do with the pure architecture proposal, but there's many things. So I hope that we would break through some days and to do something in Torino, let's hope.
And always talking about process of design process and the difficulties in arriving from the concept that you have imagined to the built architecture. They are asking how much, we have talked a lot about biophilic, the relation with nature, but how much today also artificial intelligence can be something that goes, that is a sort of attack to this kind of approach. So how much can you bring it farther and too much farther to, from nature or relation to nature? So this is more or less the question, as I understand it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I can answer to that question, in fact, but I think now because the tools, I'm not in denial of any of that, and any area of the technology, if it could be an intelligent tool to achieve, to let us reach to a certain way in an efficient, effective manner, why not use it? But more and more I think about, I am, as a personal architect's viewpoints, more drawn to doing something more primitive. So it could be like, that we have looked into a lot lately to do like adobe or mud bricks, and these kind of muddy, very textured, very primitive way of making the architecture, but still utilizing the technological, he agrees, technological tools that makes it possible, and analyzing through the means of technology, I would say, why not? But to me, it's more interesting to do something that is in a process of efficiency, and the technological advancements that could be utilized in a very efficient way. It would be amazing, but also look back what's done traditionally, more tactile, tectonic way. It's the combination somewhere in between this. It's what attracts me the most.
And if there is some other questions, or I was wondering still one question, as we have here part of a local office that is working with you. So how much has changed for you the way of working with so big groups of people? So from you mentioned Torino, local architects, then you have landscape architects, you are based in Paris. How much you have also to have a dialogue with the, or if you have to, with the Japanese-based office. How has changed in the profession of architecture to manage all these different brains, this different approach that are coming from?
Yes. I mean, it's very particular because we work also with many different countries in a different context. So, but we do need the not just technical aspect, but we do need the understanding of culture and in context and how we work as an architect in the local, normative. So that's quite important for us to work together. And far more extensively, though, because it's not just the architects, but we had engineers, we had consultants, manufacturers, contractors that are based in Italy. And we needed to deal also with the authorities and stakeholders. So there was like an extensive level of communication. And I have to say, something particular in Italy is the communication. We talk a lot. Imagine the Japanese meetings. We can go around once, and that's the end of our, conversations. While in Italy, we back and forth, and each one has a statement to make. So yeah, this communication, the verbal communication part was far more extensive than any other project that I've encountered. And this was interesting, but at the same time, it took us some time to understand like why that is and how to navigate. It takes time, but it's interesting. It's part of the fun, but part of the challenge. Yeah.
Okay. You are on the same advice. Any other questions for Yuki or? Okay.
But I'll be around, so.
Yes, you can have a personal talk with her afterwards in having a little wine and sandwiches. So I think that we are thanking you so much for coming in Torino and for giving this fantastic lecture. The projects are amazing. And we are looking forward to go to the water house in Copenhagen.
Me too.
Thank you so much. And also to see the Milan offices realized, obviously. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stasera siete tantissimi, comunque per chi non è mai stato qui da Cult Lab c'è poi un aperitivo che aspetta al pian di sotto, sarà difficile accogliere tutti, quindi a gruppetti piano piano. Ringraziamo ancora Alice Artioli, Cult Lab e gli sponsor Atrium e Casa Fornengo per aver concesso e reso possibile questa stupenda serata. Grazie ancora.